In Ezio's book, he writes, and again, you should all get it, in case you're not sold just yet. For lasting well-being, people must have the possibility of tackling their own problems through their own efforts. And so this is what he was talking about in the slides, and we talked about this over email, about this idea of expert versus diffuse design. So, however, to do this, they must have adequate knowledge and tools available. Today, possibly the most important of these tools is design capability. So I asked the panelists, and Ezio framed this as well prior to our conversation. I'll just throw this out there. How do you think about your own design capability, what that means to you? And then how do you think about the design capability of those that you work and interact with? And again, conversation amongst you all.
So one thing that we kept noticing at our studio is just the idea that while it's great to have design training, as I do and most of my team do, there's such a demotion by how expertise is generally seen. Often I think expertise comes from the learned kind, the ones that you get through from going through educations like this, the ones that I have gone through myself, but the lived experience tends to be so often seen as a subordinate kind of expertise that when we work with community, particularly in the ones that we've done across the country, we keep trying to find how do we design platforms for lived experience to be anywhere near on par with the learned experience that we often get given a lot of deferred expertise on. And we keep thinking like, what is that about? Why is lived experience so seen as not being as credible, not given grant dollars, just sort of generally not being given all that much credit? And I think that those, when we work with community, tend to be not only experts, like the only people that basically have the right to be able to determine how we present ideas on how change should be done. That I don't feel like we have a right to be able to determine what is necessary for someone else unless they are involved in that change themselves. So I think that we often are kind of dabbling in this tension between learned experience versus lived experience, and that for those as practitioners of design, we're definitely on the learned side. And I go, what do we do when, how much control and power do we give up when we give design, or in other cases, just sort of change to those who have the lived experience? But knowing that actually they've often, those with lived experience, have very rarely ever been given a platform. And I think that that's one of the really exciting and challenging things about the work that we do. Thank you. Well, Liz. So we were doing this a lot during a project called Raising Places that we did across the country. This is a project that you can now see at raisingplaces.org. It was a nationwide design endeavor funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, where we were working with 6 different communities across the country, tribal, rural, urban, and in doing so, again, sort of trying to figure out what is already present in those communities as expertise in their own lived experience, but also in the problems and the assets that are already present, and how do we do as little design as possible to elevate what is already there. And I think that was sort of very challenging for us as designers, because I think often anyone coming out of school like this, and the school I went to, we're often trying to like alter reality as opposed to honor the reality that's already there. It's like my training is to make reality different, not acknowledge it typically. It's really hard. So when you work with community members who have no reason to go to a school like this, A, because it's expensive, but also it's here. If you're in rural Montana, you're gonna just go to the school, whatever's kind of locally there. So honoring the reality of what's already happening is a really different kind of shift for us as designers, because we often have been trained to do the opposite. Does that help?
That sort of helps, but I'm struck by the idea that you weren't taught that. And here's my example. One of the concepts I was taught in design school was desire lines, right? And the idea is look where people are, what people are already doing, and elevate that, make that possible for them. And so given the way you design, I'm going to push back on you and say, really, you didn't learn about that, like the concept of looking at what people were doing and empowering that.
Kind of.
Interesting. Okay.
I mean, there's a version of it because, I mean, my training had been mostly at IDEO. So that place was, and that particular sort of mindset of doing commercial design was often a looking at reality as long as it didn't become too complicated. Like the largest complexity would be how much time can I save between ordering my latte and it getting into my hand. That's about as complicated as it got. If you're talking about systemic racism, there's no mobile app for that. So that's why it's like an order of magnitude more complicated. Therefore, honoring reality being the honoring complexity, the social history, and how power has played out for decades to make this problem as effed up as it is means that we don't casually walk in and post in our way through this. That's why it's very tough for me.
So that's super interesting. You're talking about the tensions between like designing for corporate or for-profit clients versus something like a systemic change or something in the more social innovation or social impact realm. And in my experience, something that comes up around the capabilities is kind of goes back to that concept of designing for versus designing in networks. We were working within ThoughtWorks. We do both for-profit work with corporations and organizations in consulting. We do software consultancy and technology consultancy. But we also have a big social impact branch that makes sure we're advocating for social and economic justice and build software for organizations that are mission driven. And when working with these organizations, for example, Free From, which is an organization that advocates and helps survivors of domestic violence to achieve economic justice, what we realized was we came in with the mindset of trying to fix a problem or trying to optimize something really easily. We were working with their legal department that wanted to find a way of how to educate better or how to help survivors find or pursue compensation, which you can get legally, and a lot of them didn't know. And we were trying to optimize things and being like, okay, let's just give them what they need to know, ask them a few questions, give them what they need, tell them what to do, and just go with it. And what we ended up realizing in the process was that all we needed was to create a platform to reflect back what the survivors were actually thinking about themselves, their priorities, their needs. And by creating that platform and stepping back and saying, we're just going to reflect back what this means for you, then you make the decision of which avenue of compensation to pursue and how to make it happen. So kind of like a different mindset of trying to fix something that's a click away or optimizing versus creating a platform or creating a space for that to happen kind of more organically or by the person involved.
I'll remark on your comment. I think the idea that you used the word, you said all we did was da-da-da-da-da. And I think there's incredible skill in that, in reflecting back. I don't think that's a small act. I guess I don't want to minimize what designers can do and the ability they have to reflect and enable. So that was just, it was striking to me. I feel like Ezio should say something about this. Do you have a comment? There's no train coming, so you can talk now. I know. I'm confused too.
I will try to do my best. Well, I had to say one point. My Italian English is such that I'm not sure that I capture every detail with all this. So I can try to react to, as I had a kind of impressionistic flashes, but I'm not sure that I really old, you see? This is a privilege to be, I have this one, no? So, because they know the Italian has to talk also with the hands. So if I have these two things, I cannot talk. So now I can talk a little bit better, a little bit one of the two is much more mobile. So as I said, no, but that was serious. So I'm sorry if maybe I will not be so precisely in what you was discussing with you. What I understood is that the overall discussion are right to discuss about the platforms. You have mainly discussed about the platform, okay? It's true? Yes or not? Yes. Sure. Okay. Yes, but it's not sure, because in my view, the platform are one of the elements of the ecosystems. And I don't know in your case, maybe it's in this arena, in these places, it's good to talk about the platform, because I know that, for instance, in this school, I was talking with Carlo, there are some research, and I am very, for instance, for what I got myself, very interested to learn. But maybe today, or maybe for me, I would like to keep the discussion in which you have the platform, but you have also the other layer of the system that are clear. So that if there is a tension, if I understood, but I think that I understood in between, if you do a platform for a company or if you do a platform for an NGO or an association, There is also, for instance, other kind of tensions that can happen depending on the way in which the story has been developed. For instance, I give you one example that will be a simple one, but I'm curious to know what you think. In Italy started something called Social Street. Social Street is simply, if you take the picture of what it is, or the movie of what is there, a group of people that live in the neighborhood around the street that decided to have some kind of interaction, to do something together, to help each other, to make some parties, to do the things that in some way feed the social conversation of a group of people and create a kind of a common community. In this case, the platform is a Facebook group, nothing more than that. But the system is not only the platform. It's very simple, the system, or the ecosystem. It's done by some poster that they put in the street, because it's assumed that not everybody have a Facebook, by this Facebook group, and by a bar that is the physical place where they meet. And with these three elements, the physical posters, this hyper simple, and the bar, they started to organize something that has been extremely successful. So there are hundreds of social streets in Italy, and something similar probably is not called social street, but exists in other places. On the other side, now has arrived in Italy Nextdoor. It's American, so you should know it. No, you are dealing with this platform, so I imagine that you know it. And the motivation is exactly the same. So if you say, sorry, you know Nextdoor or not?
Yes.
Do you mean the cafe? Are we
Nextdoor, the platform that connects the neighborhoods together. I just got a baby car seat.
So in this case, the beginning of the story is a company that imagined that you can make a business, and there is nothing bad on this, offering a platform that instead of being the global worldwide platform, is a platform related, so it's a general platform that you can localize. And the idea that what should happen is exactly the same than the other ones. The process that makes these things real is quite diverse. And at the moment, for instance, I don't have, and also my friend do not have done a real in-depth research to understand the difference, but it is a very big difference in between you have a group of people that use some tools that they, in some way, okay, Facebook is not done by them, but in any case, organize a very basic tool to help each other to make something happen, or to have a platform that is pre-organized and you use it, and probably the feature of this platform are much more effective and offer much more things, in between also advertisement, because at the end the business model is we can also advertise something that is at the local scale. This is why and how it should work. But per se, this is not my problem. My question, and I find that a place like this should be one of the places in which there should be the capability to make this kind of research. And now I stop on this example, but I know similar example in food and food co-op, and they are all the same. Or you have group of people that start to do together, and they choose at a certain moment to have some tools, and they put together in a kind of do-it-yourself way some elements that are needed. Or you have somebody that design a platform, also with the very best intentions, and somebody populate the platform and they enter in some kind of relationship. I don't know, if somebody have some observation and consideration to do of this one, in my view, it's a very interesting, but I don't know, it's a tension in any case to understand what happened in one case and what happens in the second one. There is.
So what I think the tension where the tension maybe comes from is not necessarily in an example like that one per se where it works in both cases, but maybe it's the type of problem or the scale of the problem that's being addressed, kind of back to what you were saying, George, of an optimization of I want to make a sale faster, right? The one click, for example, versus, oh, we have a systemic cycle of abuse that we need to interrupt and help people rebuild their lives. So the scale of a problem where you're trying to optimize sales versus solve a bigger sort of issue, that's where the tension might lie in between solutions not working on both sides per se. And I think that's where the conversation was happening. But I do agree that the platform, or in some cases creating that platform or space for the tools to be used, whether it's for profit, whether it's in the more social innovation space, would totally work. I think it's where the scale of the problem or that you're trying to solve or address, or that the client, in the case of the more commercial side, might have, it might be different than the problems that you're tackling on the other one.
Yeah, I might also piggyback and mention another tension that we often see in our work, that basically prevents a lot of the social innovation that we're trying to do, and that perhaps might stymie a platform from getting further, is the idea that design so often, I think, is limited in how much transfer of ownership that it has in it right now. There's so much ownership retention in the work that we do to basically transfer or create ownership. And I think if we go back to this mantra / t-shirt that I'm really trying to make one day, the idea that people adopt the change they were a part of making. If that this core principle of the work that we do, what are the reasons and ways in which that is stymied? And half of the time that's stymied by us. So one of the ways in which that's going to be prevented is, how do we make sure that in the design work we do, we don't actually leave and create new dependencies on us as the design team who started out? And whether or not that becomes a dependency because we now have a business model that requires tons of people to use the platform, and therefore we don't really care how the money's made. Or in the very act of doing the work, we now create new projects for ourselves to keep repeatedly coming back and actually exacerbating the situation in a community that probably has very limited resources, but keeps coming back to consultancies like ours, who are often the third party. So I think that the idea of creating ownership as an explicit goal in the project is actually quite hard to do. And I think it's probably rarer for, as a design team, to be asked to do that. What I often find is that that's not the case. And we have to really go out of our way to design it knowing that we won't be there to stick around. I think that there's a lot of consultant work, particularly in international development scenes, where that's almost baked into the beginning to say we are sneakily creating dependencies, knowing that if we don't, we won't get the next contract. That makes me feel very uncomfortable. But I know that happens all over the globe, so how do we, it's so predictable that it will happen to us, how do we design that to not happen in the first place? I don't think we're perfect, but I think it's something we have to be very mindful of from the very beginning.
So I have the extreme privilege of working within a university and actually not designing for dependency. I'm very grateful that every single one of my students I've ever had does not call me every day to ask me design advice. And so it makes me wonder, is there just a different way of approaching it? What if you approached it, your service as an educational service, with the idea of creating independent actors, independent designers, and then rather than selling a service, a consulting service?
I agree. What's really tough, though, and I think anyone who's an educator understands this tension also, is that the more that you do for someone, the more you're robbing them from the experience of learning. But the more that you let them do it, the greater the chance of them doing it poorly. It's directly in contrast with each other. This is how I've seen it. So it can be a maddening experience to watch someone not do it well, when you could just do it for them, and it'd be perfect, in quotes. And I realized that the more you do that, you're taking away from the opportunity for them to learn. So obviously the objectives are completely different. So we are trying to work out, how do we create these hybrid models?
Right.
I think for Raising Places, the example I gave before, it was all about building capacity in community, which meant that we ended up asking them to do an enormous lift in terms of not only building capacity, but also doing all the work. Mm-hmm. It was really hard. And I think that we may have gone so far, because we've gone from the other side, that we went too far.
In stepping back, you mean you stepped back so far that they had many failed attempts and
Yeah, and
such? Or
I just think that
how do you know you stepped back too far?
when the work is great, and at the same time we know it wouldn't have hurt us to do just a little bit. So now we're trying to work out like new hybrid models. We're doing actually with a project right now with a particular funder in town, where we're doing 2 of the 8, this is the current contract, 2 of the 8 research observations where we're doing them, where we're modeling the behavior, such that they can then do the rest on their own without as much. But the idea of there being an educational component, I think, is one of the ways in which you can create that ownership. But again, it's rarer, because so many funders, and I'm surprised we haven't talked about that yet, funders love buying products. They're like funding products. Actual individuals who are funders themselves love getting the tangibility of a thing.
Yes.
To fund a process is nuts. I mean, they have a really hard time with that. So I think it's challenging to say, we're going to just teach them how to do it, because then they're like, well, what do you get? It's very difficult to answer that question. So that's why there's like hybridity, as it were, or the explicit nature of wanting to only teach build capacity is rare.
I was going to add to that, because it is rare. I also work in consulting, so we run into that all the time. And when we do have the opportunities to do what we call enablement, which basically means...
That's a good term, enablement.
enablement. So yeah, an engagement could be potentially enablement, or it could be actually building a product or a service. When it comes to enablement or enabling teams, what ends up happening is we enable like designers that work there already. So it's rarely about enabling people who don't necessarily have a design background. It's about enabling their design teams to perform better or to grow their capabilities, but not necessarily the rest of the team to understand design capabilities. And particularly in smaller organizations or mission-driven ones, what ends up happening is, because they don't have designers, unquote, on their staff, they're like, oh, we don't really need to learn this, just do it for us. So it ends up being that, again, that tension, especially in smaller organizations or nonprofits, where they barely have enough people to continue the work, let alone to actually want to take some of that forward.
Maybe we can ask them. I think this time I understood better. I'm improving my English. It's a very intensive course. So I am already better than half an hour ago. Yes, thank you. Now, I think that this issue about the ownership is one of the most important, at the same time subtle, but it's fundamental. I think that you already said that it's fundamental, so it's not to be added. It's necessary to make some concrete example in different cases, because what does it mean ownership, and who has to have the ownership is diverse, because if you could have some case in which the ownership or the one that will use the platform to do something for somebody else, or the owner are to be the one that are at the same time the final user and also the one that participates, so the prosumer in some way of the story. And of course, it's not the same thing in terms of, and in my view, again, it depends a lot from the process. So it's not only, maybe I maybe misunderstood, but I had the impression that you talk always about a process, say somebody make a platform for somebody else, and this platform has to have some capability to involve the people and hopefully to make them have some, but sometimes things are not going like this. Very often they are not going like this. So there are a group of people that start to do something, and afterward they use some platform or they require for some platform. So the group, the emerging community pre-exists to the digital platform, and pre-exists on a platform that is much more simple technologically, so maybe they use a telephone and few others. So we always use technology also when we don't use a digital platform. And if it happens, if the first move is to design a platform and hope that somebody will use it, or somebody organizes themselves to make something happen and afterward they ask
for a consultancy in making also a digital platform, the forces around the table, the sense of ownership of what is done is completely diverse, obviously. I find that when, for instance, in the many different platforms, you have a platform that asks to people, what normally would be the final user, to be activated in doing something. This is the crucial, the one in which the issue about ownership is more crucial, because if somebody, and somebody could be an institution, ask to people to be activated in help each other, in take care of each other, in take care of the neighborhoods or whatever, the people have to feel that they are doing it for themselves. And because otherwise they have the impression to do for free for the city. And if something happens in the platform that the people have the impression that they are simply exploited by as a free work, they become much more upset. So they have to have the feeling that they are doing from themselves. But when they do from themselves, we enter in that discussion. I don't know it is how much is diffused in this, of the difference in between when we talk about the public space and when we talk about the commons. Because the ownership that has to be generated is the ownership of the commons. It means, if I use the example of the social street, or the example that everybody knows of the community garden, somebody has to feel the ownership of that community garden, of that street. And it's exactly because there is a group of people that feel the ownership of the street, of the garden, that is not an empty place, because there are some streets that can be public, but dead. They become alive if you don't have simply a public space. But if you have a public space that is populated by a community that feels to have a kind of communal ownership. But it's clear that the communal ownership could become in time less communal and more ownership. And therefore, in the platform, there has to be some affordance, I don't know if you use this term, that try to avoid that proposing the sense of ownership become the ownership of a small group of people that feel that this is really us. That sometimes it happens. I think that happens also here. It happens in the case that I know, that at a certain point there is a kind of clash in between the group of people that has been activated in managing something in the street or organizing some kind of event, and all the other that says, yes, but they are always that group that do something. So this point is a point that is really very, very delicate, and how to do it. And I think that if we, in the overall system of that I call the ecosystem that should sustain this kind of activity, we focus too much on the digital platform, we lose I think that it's not your case, but I know that when I teach, when I make some courses, the platform is a kind of digital world now. So whatever you propose, in 30 seconds, somebody is talking about platforms. No, it's true, I don't know. Maybe somebody has to study, maybe here there is somebody that study only that one. It is good to study that one in the place in which you are there to study the platform. But it's not that all the story that I try at least to propose is reduced to the platform. And in any case, to understand how the platform works, you have to have very clear idea of the element of the contents, because also Uber is a platform. And Uber, once upon a time, was a nice group of, not Uber, but the idea of the carpooling was a nice group of people doing a very nice social issue, and I don't know what you think, but it became, we can discuss. If you want, we can discuss. But for sure, some element, there was the quality that I could recognize in a carpooling, you cannot find it in Uber. Therefore, the capability to control how avoid that something that start as a platform that help people to do something in a social way. And so I talk by the point of view, that was my presentation, that maybe it's not the only point of view, but my point of view is how all this reweave society, reweave the relationship between the people and reweave the relationship between the people and the places. So if you have a platform that at a certain point, in name of something, lose this capability, sometimes it's neutral, but sometimes could become also very negative. And therefore, there is the good design is to make it start, but also to see what does it mean, to try to avoid or to make it less probable that all the story turn towards something that in some way is opposite to the original ideas. And and to conclude, this is something that is related to a better understanding of the overall context that, as I said, for me is an ecosystem that could have something important in the platform, but the platform do not include the whole ecosystem. And a discussion that I would like to do, maybe not now, is when you really talk about the platform, what are what I call, but I'm not expert of platform, the affordances that you can put in the platform to try to gently avoid that this platform could be misused. And sometimes there is a kind of clash again in between an idea of effectiveness by a certain point of view, the point of view of going from A to B at a lower price. And so you create a platform that try to make the best to permit to you, the user, to go from A to B. And given that it's so effective, this platform can be diffused a lot. But this platform can be diffused a lot, this is super efficient, etc., could become Uber. So what you have to put inside the platform to maintain some element of the quality of the relationship, but very probably make the platform less effective if you consider only one variable. And therefore, if you want to consider, for instance, the one that uses the car and the one that drives the car, or if you want to consider the one that uses the car, the one that drives the car, and the environment, and other people and other environment, how you design a platform that try to embed in the way in which the platform is done this kind of use instead of another use. For me, these are the questions that can be developed and should be developed by who is dealing with digital platform. But to do it, you have to have maintain always a very general vision at the end of the day what you want to do, beyond the fact that if you are a business, you have to make your business. But I hope that there are many different ways to make a business.
Fernanda, I think you were sort of talking about that with your work with the biased algorithms and things like that, talking about what you're talking with your tech clients.
Yeah, so something that we've done, and I wish I could say that we've solved that. It's not necessarily just for platforms, but in working in technology and with emerging technology, what we've realized is that, especially at ThoughtWorks, we needed to do more than just engage in projects with mission-driven companies and try to advocate for diversity and inclusion, but we actually needed to start taking a lot of these ideas and things to consider to our actual corporate clients. So one of the building blocks of the framework that we use for our social impact branch is building an equitable tech future. And what that means is going to our paying clients, corporate clients, and whenever building a platform or building any technology really that we're engaging with them, being able to have a discussion and a conversation and even some educational lunch and learns around the consequences of what they're building. And some of those might be algorithmic bias, for example, if they're building something, some algorithms to determine certain aspects of things, or even just talking about the consequences of their, like environmentally, any like products or any materials that they're using to build things, if there's hardware involved, or being able to discuss how to prevent some of those things from happening. So how to think more ethically about products that are going to be built. And this is, again, something that we're kind of starting to do. So there hasn't been a full-on precedent, but a lot of our clients are actually open to having those conversations. And a lot of the times they don't think about those elements because no one has questioned them about them. So bringing those conversations to the forefront has helped at least start to steer some of the decisions that are made around how we design technology to be more human and ethical and thinking about the evolution of it, so not just the immediate.
I was just going to mention about the idea that perhaps you haven't had a precedent yet, and that these early conversations with your clients. I do think that clients are ready, but I think that they perhaps lack the practice, perhaps like most people do, and that the repeated, constant vigilance of having to practice those questions of can we and should we do this work is what will make this field go further, versus the version that we have right now, which is, I think, still fairly lacking in practice. And I think that the ability for consultancies, clients, and not every client is interested in this at all. Some clients are only interested in just getting as much work done as possible. But they are curious about being challenged. And I think in some cases going toe-to-toe about what is the appropriateness of this use of either the technology or the work, as a consultancy might. We've now, I think, done to date, I've been trying to keep track, about 21 breakup emails where we say, it's not you, it's me, I'm really sorry, we can't do this project. We can refer you to someone else who can do the work, but we just can't. And I think that sort of practice at having to say no and figuring out what the no is like a source of power. And I think it is a source for us. And it's really counterintuitive that we've actually become better at it because we've turned down as many people as we have. It's never fun at all. It's terrifying most of the time. And the first time we did it was with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and we were sure we were never going to hear from them again. I had to actually apologize to the person who introduced us first to say, I'm going to mess this up. I'm really sorry. You don't have to talk to me again, but I'm going to screw this up now. And then I sent the breakup email to what would have been a former future client. But that rigor is nuts. It's insanely hard. Because and I think both sides are kind of wondering, are you going to do it? Are you going to say something? Shall I say something? It's really awkward. But I think in doing that practice, both sides actually get a little more testing of what is the line that we supposedly are ready to obliterate.
I do have something to say, Jessica, which is in Design for America, while we focus on the undergraduate studio experience, we increasingly have a large number of alum and throughout the country and actually the world, and we increasingly have a lot of what we call friends of Design for America, and these are adults who are working at their jobs and are really interested in doing design and thinking about design in a new way, and they sneak into our programs as if they're not quite sure, but they're so enamored and excited by the way that the students are approaching design and the questions they're asking. And I'm seeing this as a playground for them to test out ideas, meet other people who are trying to do this in their own organization, and then often looking to hire our students to bring them in and really make a change within their own organization. And so I think I hadn't thought about that as it's really professional development and exposure to new ways of doing for these people who have been educated many years ago, and these weren't the ideas that they were educated with, but they still are very enamored and interested in them.
That sounds super interesting. I would love to talk more to you about that. But also, I wanted to point out sort of what you were talking about, sort of drawing that line with clients and being able to say no. And what I found is, especially for larger organizations, I think ThoughtWorks now is 5,000 people worldwide. It becomes a little bit trickier every time because we have this social impact group who's basically the branch of the organization that advocates for social and economic justice and that serves as an advisor sort of for the rest of the organization. So not only in actually engaging in projects with mission-driven organizations, but helping with recruiting and how do we talk about what we do, helping with onboarding and making sure that whoever comes into the organization is actually aligned with our values and it's aligned with what we believe in, and software kind of being for good and a lot of other things. But then there's these tensions where there's times where we have clients that come knocking on our door and being like, hey, I want you to help me build this. And the social impact group might be like, I don't know if this is a great idea, but there's still that running a sustainable business aspect that gets into conflict. And I see this not only within our own organization, but with some of our clients that we work in. And we haven't quite figured out how to like find that balance, because yes, saying no and setting that line on the sand is one strategy. A lot of the times what we've tried to do is do a harm reduction strategy, where it's like, okay, well, if we're going to work with an organization that maybe is not the best, what can we do to either minimize the harm that they're doing or help prevent further harm, kind of like to the platform example, right? So maybe if it's working, I don't know, with like an oil company, how can we help them improve the technology in their wells so that they don't actually have a lot of spills? Or how do we help them improve their processes so they can have less harm on the environment? So there's kind of like that balance of like, where do you say no and where do you actually say, well, as a designer in this particular role, how can I help make the best of the situation or minimize the future harm?
Since we don't have a ton of time left, I want to throw it back out to the audience to see if people have burning questions for George, Fernanda, Liz, or Ezio.
Anche non burning. Also non necessarily burning, could be also a little bit warm.
It doesn't have to hurt at all.
I thought you had yesterday.
I want to be a little provocative.
Good, thank you.
Do you know of any other profession, can you think of any other profession that goes out into the field and says, here's our secret sauce, go do it yourself? And perhaps this is the failing of the design profession, and the way I'm hearing it here, and maybe I'm interpreting it wrongly, is that we don't take ownership of our ideas. And we don't take ownership of the return on investment that they put into us. And we expect them to get the return on investment themselves. So perhaps it's time for us to, like Dennis said, stop thinking of ourselves as training designers who then go out and train other designers, but train people who actually can design, which is different from training design.
Clergy. Clergy.
So the clergy tells people to pray themselves, people and sermon themselves.
Connect with God yourself. I mean, I'm trying to come up with a counterexample. You can go.
What do you guys think?
Do you want me to answer or we listen to?
I want to hear your answer.
No, I can tell you the story. When I started to think in this way, and it was a long time ago. It was a long time ago. And in Italy, we had, as in many places, the hospital for the people that have mental disease. And probably nobody knows, maybe only the Italians know. At a certain point, we had a doctor that was the director of one of these hospitals. They were called Basaglia. They said, we have to open the hospital, that kind of hospital, because it was terrible. So I don't know how you are with this mental problem hospital. And he said, if you consider the people with some mental problem, by the point of view of the mental problem that they have, they will become more and more sick. And so he said, all the institution is built to make people sicker and sicker. But everybody is not only mad, everybody is also normal, if normal means something, let's say more similar to the other. And if you build around them an environment that gives them the opportunity to be normal, helping them in the moment of crisis, you create a condition for them to have a better life and to improve, and not to enter in this kind of spiral of becoming mad and madder and madder and madder. And so what I did is said, we, the doctor, the nursery, etc., have to work with those people to organize things. And the things has to be valuable, profitable. And they started to organize a lot of restaurants, a lot of bed and breakfast, farms, and they were doctors, and maybe being helped also by somebody else, tried and succeed, not always, but succeed in organize those people that, by the way, were until that moment considered mad, to become the one that generate this kind of activity. By the way, this is a one of the few Italian story of which I am particularly proud, because this man, Basaglia, has been a genius, because he succeeded also not only make things happen in his own place, but to spread it and to make the pressure to change the law. So Italy has been the first, or one of the first countries in the world that has closed, eliminated the mental hospital. Afterward, not everything works well, of course, but there is no anybody, this total institution. There was the hospital like this, and the idea is you have to create conditions for the people. This happened for me in the 70s. And I started to think that there was something fantastic in this idea, and I don't know if it is the answer, but I think that it's the answer. These were doctors that try to make something happen like this. But if you want to, say, if I teach to people that have some difficulties in life with drugs or something like that, and I help them in organizing some activities, it's me, that I am a designer, maybe with a manager, that or help people to become free. For instance, we have another one of the many, not so many good examples that is called Libera, that is another association in Italy that deal with the people that want to get out from mafia. And the mafia is a kind of a big mama that help you in everything. So it's very difficult to get out from that system, because it's not only the way you work, but you are protected. So Libera, well, now I cannot tell you all the story, but try to create conditions that are very similar to the one that we said, to give to those people the possibility to work, to make their own life, and to feel protected the one with the other one, because we are talking about a very risky condition, but as you can imagine. So in my view, this example could be a little bit at the limit, but I think that are a good example of somebody that has been capable to enter, to make something happen, and afterward to give to those people autonomy and capability to go on by themselves. I can add a third example. This is something that I'm proud, because it has been done by my colleagues, my ex-students, that now are professional, working in something called social Fondazione Housing Sociale, Social Housing Foundation, and they started to introduce the idea that social housing is not only cheap, relatively cheap houses, but they have to have some social activities, similar to eco-housing, if you want. And all the story that now I will not tell you everything because we don't have time, but what is important is, and it's one of the key points, that the team that helped the group of people living there has to have, as one of the pillars of their own activity, the exit strategy. So how they, during the project, create a condition for the group to be capable to go on by themselves. Because the risk in doing what we are saying, that people, as you were saying, if I well understood, become in some way dependent. So they think that the designer is a kind of social worker that is always there, where the social worker maybe is always there because this is his own job, but the designer, no, at a certain point has to finish. So how you create in a project that, by the point of view of the non-expert design, will continue forever, is an open-ended, because there is always something to be redesigned to maintain the story alive. But the professional team has to have a program that says at a certain point, we make a beautiful party, We cry on the shoulder one of the other one, we say has been beautiful, and we go. And you have to be capable to do things by yourself. And this is, in my view, professionality. I don't know if this answers to your question again, but it's your work. If you say, in my work is to help somebody to stand and to move and to go, at a certain point I have to say, let's go, and it's finished. And if it's not capable to go, it means that my authoriality has been a failure. So I have been author of something that has not worked. I'm not sure that I'm answered, but I did my best.
I'm curious, was the question based on the idea that perhaps design is becoming more, like diluted, or there's too many people doing it? What was the, is there a concern?
I was trying to be provocative.
Because I do think it's changing.
I mean, Dennis brings up in family meetings, he'll bring up this thought that we have this idea that designers will create this beautiful gift that we give to communities, and the communities will open it and be self-sustaining in some process, some way. I don't think that narrative is completely true. Right? I mean, we have arguments about this in fact.
I mean, so that's probably still happening. I'm not sure if I know if I have a purview on the idea of where design is going, but I could have slightly more of a purview on where the future of social design might be going, and I definitely think that is going to look very different than what it is right now. I think we're still carrying a lot of carryover from the, dare I say, Bauhaus principles of what good design is right now, and I think in this institution that is the living body testament of modern Bauhaus, that's a little scary for me to say because I might never get invited back again. But exactly, or get ejected out. But I think that the principles around, I know. Oh, okay, good. But the principles by which Bauhaus design, I think, still rest tend to be very Eurocentric, very white, and incredibly colonialistic. And I think that for someone who grew up in England as a Burmese person, seeing this white standard for what is the best, I was mixing up high frequency for normalcy. As in, like, high instances, how many times I saw it meant that was like the gold standard. That didn't necessarily mean it was normal, it's just all I ever saw. But because I couldn't figure that out until about a year ago, it was the only way I ever saw the world. I'm now realizing how deeply flawed that is, and how many cultures across the globe are completely obliterated and ignored for having their own standards for what design could be, or what crafts could be, or what art could be, or what high quality design work could be. So when you think about social design, deeply embedded in community that have histories that go long before, Second World War era import from Europe into Chicago, you have to acknowledge that there's a lot of cultures that have possibly been forgotten about. So I'm thrilled that Black Panther is getting celebrated across the globe, across Hollywood, for recognition in its Afrocentric and Afrofuturistic vision for what a non-European centered vision for what the future could be. But how many other places have there been ignored? Like Burmese culture, amazing. I barely know it. I have to carry that shame, actually. But the idea that there is probably versions of what is truth and therefore what is good, carrying to the social sector can't be held back by highly kerned, beautifully set typography, of which I have a huge obsession over, but I can't carry that to be the only norm. That's the only way I could answer that question.
I'm super excited to get the cutoff for this event on the call for Black Panther for every culture around the world. I want to thank you all. We're past time, so I could talk about design all day long because it's my favorite thing. But I want to thank George, Fernanda, Liz, and especially Ezio. If we could give everyone a round of applause.